American soldiers captured by the Germans got potatoes and Red Cross parcels. American soldiers captured by the Japanese got rice so infested with live worms that the meal moved on the plate. Then they started eating the worms on purpose. Then they started fighting over dead rats. Your body needs about 2,000 calories a day to function. Japanese POW camps provided 300. The human digestive system can't process potato plant stems. They're fibrous, bitter, indigestible. Camp cooks boiled them into soup anyway. Prisoners called it green death because it turned your mouth green and gave you diarrhea, but you ate it because 50 calories of anything was better than nothing. Meanwhile, packages of salmon, corned beef, chocolate, and medicine sat in warehouses 100 yards from the barracks. The Japanese knew they were there. The prisoners knew they were there. Nobody opened the warehouse. We're walking through exactly what American POWs ate in Japanese camps. The watery rice gruel that caused dysentery, the rats they trapped at night, the Christmas meal that appeared once and vanished while men wasted to 80 pounds. Every meal was a choice between contaminated and deadly. Most men made the wrong choice. Some lived anyway. By April 1942, American soldiers defending the Bataan Peninsula had been on half rations since January. Then the half rations ran out. They started eating monkeys, then snakes, then iguanas, then horses when the cavalry mounts finally collapsed, then mules when the artillery teams couldn't pull the guns anymore. One survivor remembered losing 15 to 25 pounds in 3 months. Men got malaria, dengue fever, dysentery, all while trying to hold back a Japanese army with ammunition they didn't have and reinforcements that never came. The food situation got so desperate that eating reptile meat stopped being a crisis and started being Tuesday. The defenders knew help wasn't coming. MacArthur had evacuated to Australia. The supply ships weren't going to break through the Japanese blockade. On April 9th, they surrendered. About 76,000 men, 10,000 Americans, the rest Filipino troops, laid down their weapons. These men were already starving before they became prisoners. Their immune systems were already compromised. Their bodies were already cannibalizing muscle tissue for fuel. The Japanese captured broken soldiers and kept breaking them. Meanwhile, in German POW camps, American prisoners received 9 pounds of potatoes per week, 5 pounds of bread, 2.5 pounds of cabbage, plus small amounts of sausage and ersatz coffee made from leached acorns. The Germans had signed the Geneva Convention. The math worked. About 1% of American POWs in German camps died. The Japanese never ratified the Geneva Convention. They didn't consider surrender honorable. A Japanese soldier was supposed to save his last bullet for himself rather than face capture. The men who did surrender were beneath contempt. That attitude shaped everything that happened next. The death march started at the southern tip of Bataan, Mariveles, and went north 66 miles to San Fernando, then by rail to Capas, then another 9 miles on foot to Camp O'Donnell, 5 to 10 days depending on when you joined the column, 0 food, 0 water, tropical heat, guards who shot anyone who fell behind or tried to drink from roadside puddles. The Japanese had expected maybe 25,000 prisoners. They got 76,000. They hadn't prepared logistics for even the smaller number. No food stocks, no water distribution, no medical supplies, no plan except march them north and figure it out later. Men drank from carabao's wallows, stagnant water buffalo ponds. Some drank from puddles that had runoff from latrines. They knew the water would make them sick. Dysentery was guaranteed. Thirst won anyway. Thousands died on the march. Estimates range from 7,000 to 10,000 Filipinos and 500 to 650 Americans. Heat stroke, dehydration, disease, or a bullet when they couldn't keep walking. The survivors arrived at Camp O'Donnell already damaged. Dehydration causes kidney stress. Untreated dysentery causes fatal fluid loss. Malaria becomes exponentially more dangerous when your body has no reserves. The men who made it to camp were starting from negative numbers. One soldier had a single canteen of water for 10 days. Another got 1 rice ball the size of a fist once. That was the march. Absolute deprivation. No choices, no calories, no hope. Just walk until you die or reach the camp. The march matters because it explains why camp food killed so efficiently. A healthy man can survive on terrible rations for a while. These men had lost 20% of their body weight before capture, then lost more on the march, then arrived at a camp where the daily ration was 300 calories. The math was impossible from the start. Camp food was a slow form of execution. The main meal was lugao, thin rice gruel served twice a day. About 8 ounces in the morning, maybe 24 at noon for those on work detail. The rice was white, stripped of its husk and thiamine. The water was filthy. The pots were never cleaned. The rice writhed with life. Weevils floated to the surface, wriggling in the broth. At first, men picked them out. Then they realized the insects were the only protein they'd get. Soon they ate them without hesitation. Worms and insect parts were common. Sometimes the whole bowl seemed to move. Prisoners joked that the first meat at Camp O'Donnell was the weevils in the lugao. Each serving had maybe 160 calories, barely 300 total per day with almost no protein. A working man needed 70 grams daily. They got 12. Their bodies began eating themselves. Then came the green death, a soup of boiled potato leaves and camote vines, bitter, stringy, and nearly indigestible. It filled the stomach, but caused diarrhea and cramps. Occasionally, scraps of squash or eggplant appeared, so small you had to search for them. It was food only by definition. The rice was often spoiled before cooking, moldy, sour, decaying. Survivors described it as smelling like paste, tasting worse. Every meal forced a choice: eat and risk dysentery, or refuse and starve faster. Some men died from the food itself, others from refusing it. No one stayed whole. By late 1944, Red Cross packages reached the Philippines: salmon, corned beef, chocolate, milk, soap. Enough to keep men alive for weeks. The Japanese collected them, then locked them away. Prisoners never saw a single can. The lugao had a design flaw that turned deadly. White rice, stripped of its husk, lost thiamine, vitamin B1. Without it, the body develops beriberi. Wet beriberi made men swell as their hearts failed. Dry beriberi burned their nerves until they couldn't stand. Ankles ballooned to twice their size. Feet felt as if they were on fire. Some men went blind from vitamin loss. Others developed pellagra from niacin deficiency, skin peeling, diarrhea, delirium. Scurvy reopened old wounds and made gums bleed until teeth loosened and fell out. The human body has a survival hierarchy. When calories vanish, it starts shutting systems down. First reproduction, then hair growth, then the immune system. It begins consuming muscle for protein, then organ tissue. Past a point, even feeding can't reverse the decay. The Japanese knew this. They weighed prisoners weekly and logged their decline. Sick men had their rations cut by 1/3. The logic was bureaucratic and lethal. Those too weak to work needed less food, which made them weaker still. The labor itself burned thousands of calories, hauling coral, moving stone, hacking runways under a tropical sun. In return, prisoners got about 300 calories a day. Bodies shrank from 140 pounds to 80, some to 50. Skin tightened over bone, faces hollowed, eyes sank back into skulls. Men spoke less, moved less. One officer remembered men so depleted they would sit on their bunks staring at a sink across the room, trying to decide if walking 10 feet was worth the effort. Most decided it wasn't. In July 1942 alone, 799 American prisoners died at Camp O'Donnell. The camp sat on swampy rice paddies alive with mosquitoes and disease. Death became routine. By late 1942, the daily toll still reached hundreds. Yet medical relief sat locked away. Red Cross surgical kits, gauze, and antibiotics arrived in 1943 and 1944. The Japanese stacked them in storage sheds and never opened them. When liberators entered in 1945, they found the crates untouched, complete surgical chests still sealed. The prisoners knew. They saw the warehouses. They knew the Red Cross had sent food and medicine meant for them. They just couldn't reach it. 300 calories a day wasn't enough to live on. Prisoners started looking for anything that could keep them alive. They stole from Japanese storerooms when they could. They bribed guards with rings, watches, anything they'd managed to hide. Some dug small gardens in the corners of the camp, but most turned to the only source of meat that moved. If it crawled, hopped, or slithered, it became food. Rats, snakes, frogs, lizards, even insects. At Cabanatuan, men invented a midnight sport they called gorking, sneaking into Japanese duck ponds to steal a bird or two. Getting caught meant execution. Still, they went. Duck meat meant a few more days alive. One dawn, a cook making rice gruel found a rat floating in the pot. His superior told him to toss it out the window before anyone saw. When he did, 10 starving men were waiting. They tore the rat apart in seconds. Bones, fur, everything vanished. Hunger had erased disgust. They knew disease lived in those rats. They knew the risk. But hunger doesn't reason, it only commands. Cats, dogs, grasshoppers, snakes, nothing was off limits. Those near villages smuggled trinkets through the fence to trade for duck eggs or fruit. It was a crime punishable by death, yet they risked it anyway. A handful of calories could mean one more sunrise. Camp life became an economy of hunger. A spoonful of rice was currency. Men with skills the Japanese valued could bargain for extra food. Those extra rations went to the sick or were traded for medicine. Every friendship, every favor was measured in calories. Then came Christmas, 1944. The Japanese finally allowed a Red Cross meal. For a moment, the camp felt almost human again. But within weeks, it ended. Over the next 3 months, only 2 boxes per man arrived, while the warehouses stayed full. The prisoners could see the food stacked behind barbed wire, close enough to imagine the taste, far enough to starve looking at it. By December 1944, Japan was losing. American forces had landed on Leyte. Across the Pacific, defeat was closing in. At Camp Palawan, 150 American POWs were still building airstrips with shovels and picks, starving and beaten daily. On December 14th, guards woke them at 2 a.m. to fill bomb craters. By late morning, they were told their working days were over. The men thought liberation was near. Hours later, they were herded into trenches, doused with gasoline, and set on fire. Those who escaped the flames were shot or bayoneted. Only a handful survived. News of the massacre reached other camps. At Cabanatuan, prisoners knew what it meant. The Japanese would kill them before surrendering. And then came Christmas. On December 25, 1944, the prisoners received a miracle, a full Red Cross meal, salmon, corned beef, cheese, chocolate, biscuits, cigarettes. The first real food in years. Men tried to eat slowly, but many fell sick. Their bodies couldn't process the sudden richness. For a few weeks, small portions continued. Death rates fell. Hope returned. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. By February 1945, the rations were gone. Each man had received less than 2 boxes in 3 months, though warehouses still overflowed with food. Some camps never saw a single Red Cross parcel. Others watched Japanese guards strip out the medicine and lock away the food. The cruelty wasn't chaos, it was controlled. Prisoners knew the supplies existed. They saw them. They knew their families believed they were being fed. It wasn't neglect, it was deliberate. A standard American Red Cross prisoner of war, food package number. 10 held everything needed to keep a man alive. Corned beef, meatloaf, salmon, sardines, powdered milk, butter, jam, raisins, biscuits, sugar, cheese, chocolate, and soap. Each box weighed 11 pounds and held about 2,500 calories, 8 times what prisoners got from their daily lugao. 1 parcel per week would have been enough to prevent starvation entirely. The medical kits were just as thorough. Sterile gauze, scalpels, antibiotics, vitamins, antiseptics, bandages. Enough to treat dysentery, malaria, beriberi, diseases that wiped out men by the dozens every day. Thousands of these boxes sat stacked in warehouses just outside the barbed wire. The Japanese guards didn't eat them. They didn't destroy them. They simply never opened them. After the war, investigators found the logic behind the cruelty. Japan's supply lines were collapsing, and they prioritized their own troops. Captured soldiers were considered disgraced, unworthy of care. And the parcels made excellent leverage. Hand out a few when obedience wavered, withhold the rest when fear was needed. At Santo Tomas in Manila, Red Cross worker Marie Adams weighed 95 pounds by February 1945. She'd calculated she had about 5 days left before her body gave out. The camp was liberated on the 4th. She lived, barely. Across other camps, survivors were down to 78 pounds, some barely 50. The average American soldier had entered the war at 150. After liberation, the survivors devoured food uncontrollably. Many ate and vomited or defecated at once, their bodies rejecting what they'd been denied too long. When Allied forces entered the camps, they found the truth piled to the rafters. Unopened food parcels, sealed medical chests, surgical instruments still wrapped in 1943 paper. Everything had been there the whole time. 57% of Americans held by Japan died. In German camps, the figure was 1%. The difference wasn't circumstance, it was deliberate withholding, help that had arrived, labeled, and delivered, only to die behind a locked door. January 30th, 1945. Army Rangers, Alamo Scouts, and Filipino guerrillas raided Cabanatuan and liberated 513 prisoners. The men could barely walk. Most weighed under 100 pounds. Some had to be carried. When they reached American medical stations, doctors started feeding them carefully. Too much food too fast would kill them. The prisoners told their stories. They described the lugao with live weevils. They described eating rats and snakes. They described watching friends die from diseases that basic medicine would have prevented. And they described the warehouses full of Red Cross supplies they'd never received. February 3rd, 1945. American forces liberated Santo Tomas in Manila. Marie Adams walked out weighing 95 pounds, days from death. Other survivors weighed 78 to 85 pounds. Children born in the camp were malnourished from birth. Women who'd been healthy before capture looked decades older. The pattern repeated across the Philippines and then in Japan itself. Every liberated camp had the same story. Prisoners on the edge of death, warehouses full of Red Cross supplies, medical equipment unused. After the war, American military tribunals tried some of the Japanese officers responsible. Camp commandants were convicted of war crimes. Some were executed. Some had their sentences reduced to life imprisonment. Some were pardoned in the 1950s and sent back to Japan. The survivors went home. Most still suffered from the physical effects. Beriberi damage is often permanent. Organ damage from prolonged starvation doesn't fully heal. Tropical diseases like malaria recur for years. The psychological effects were worse. Many survivors never talked about their experience. Some couldn't eat rice for the rest of their lives. The smell of lugao, that watery, sour, weevil-infested rice gruel, stayed with them. Some survivors wrote memoirs, some gave interviews, most just tried to rebuild their lives and forget what they'd eaten to stay alive. The final statistics? Of approximately 27,000 American military prisoners held by the Japanese, more than 11,000 died, a 40% mortality rate. Some estimates put the overall mortality rate for all Allied prisoners in Japanese hands at 57%. Compare that to German camps, where about 1% of American prisoners died. The difference was documented. Survivors testified. Medical records confirmed the malnutrition and disease. War crimes trials established culpability. We know exactly what happened and exactly who made the decisions. There's a photograph from February 1945, liberated prisoners at Cabanatuan sitting on the ground while medics move between them with food and water. They look weightless, as if the war had hollowed them out from the inside. What lingers isn't the sight of starvation, but the nearness of what could have stopped it. The food had made it, packed in America, shipped across the Pacific, unloaded at the camps, and then left untouched in locked warehouses while men boiled rice crawling with weevils. They knew those supplies were there. Every march to labor passed the buildings that held their survival. The guards weighed them weekly, rationed their decline, and called it discipline. When rescue finally came, some were already counting their last days. Many never spoke of it again. A few never stopped smelling that rice. The help existed, the boxes sat waiting, and nobody turned the key.